Okay. Yes. Yes. Microphone for the recording. So this is a question for everybody, because like I said earlier, you take us through these different portals, whether it's through ancestry or fantasy or grief or revolution. Like you're taking us to these places. So when you're writing, how do you take care of yourselves as you're exploring these worlds?
Okay. Hello. Um, it's a good question. It's something I ask myself often. Um, I think, if anything, I try my best to listen to music after I write or while I'm writing, something to keep me grounded, and something that I've been in search for and trying to replicate because I just, with Alie, graduated from Mills College and got my MFA. Thank you. And while I was there was when I was really writing into the project about my mom. And during that time, of course, I was writing in community and writing while really feeling held. And so I think if there's any way to find community, that's always helped me. Yeah.
This is something I'm also really in conversation with too. Because when you're putting your spirit and your soul and your magic into your writing, it also becomes something that you have to kind of do a self-care ritual practice with. I have my own kind of reading and writing ritual that I do. I usually get some coffee, read a book, and then kind of dive into some writing. And that in and of itself is kind of a ritual that has continued to keep me as I'm kind of like in the work of it. And it also just gives me a little bit of like a arm's length distance sometimes. And that's really something you need, I think, while you're kind of delving into subjects that are really close to you and your heart. And so I think that I'm still kind of in the process of finding out, okay, what happens after I'm done writing this piece and everything is swirling in my head and I'm thinking about, okay, where am I going next with it? Am I happy with where it is right now? Where am I, where is it going to go after I'm done with it? All of this kind of, all these questions. And sometimes it just kind of warrants a call to a friend and just, talking to them, not even about the writing, but just about life. How are you doing today? Like, what's going on? And sometimes that also kind of gives me some distance too. So definitely leaning on the community, I guess, is something that I'm coming to right now that, or putting into words that I've done before to kind of self-care.
Yes, we got community. We have some rituals and community.
The first thing that occurs to me to say is that for me, my writing practice is self-care. It's a place that I go to work out, make sense of, and sort of filter through things that I've been exposed to. A lot of my popular work is about race and racism and internalized racism and all of that. And I was reading some Toni Morrison and I realized and came to agree with something that she said, which was essentially that, racism is a white disease. And I've realized recently that it's not my work, that taking other people's medicine won't make them well, and that it's not my job to spend my career working out something that I didn't create and that I don't perpetuate. So I'm leaning away from work that I find to be, it's kind of traumatizing to constantly contemplate your own oppression in hopes of somehow slaughtering it, or honoring people that came before you. And I think my way of honoring people who came before me is going to be to stop repeating things that they've already said better than me.
Ashe. Yeah. Mr. Eisen-Martin.
uh, it's almost like writing is a psychic chore, just like walking around this motherfucker. And so, I mean, because it's really just, it's kind of just a parallel, a parallel existence, parallel to an existence that really takes a toll. I think it's like, it's not necessarily I get like linearly better at it. Sometimes, you can either through praxis of, actually doing something about these realities that we describe in terrifying ways. Not that writing is not doing anything, but there's other ways you could put your hands in history, and that gives you an energy, or gives you a kind of, I don't know, it goes grandiose to say invincibility, but almost it makes, struggle is actually natural, or fighting for liberation is actually natural. And when you get in tune with that, then actually not doing anything becomes the torture, or not writing anything becomes the torture. There's just so many little weird orientations that evolve or then devolve. You know what I mean? And you just kind of do the best you can. But I'll say over time, if there's any kind of like actionable intelligence, I say meditation really has gone a long way as far as just like, helping me deal with all this bullshit with more space.
Yes. Thank you all for that. Each of those answers is really poignant, really important, right? And so I want to open it up to y'all. I think we have our first question.
So you mentioned how the readings are. Oh, yes, thank you. Hello. So you mentioned how the readings in LA were slightly different, and so I asked that question of all of you when it comes to readings in different places, and have you noticed a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I haven't done like a lot of readings. Of course, there's a difference between like, open mics and then when you're actually like on the lineup with other folks and those different things. But I think the energy just always feels really different. And I can definitely say that's probably because of, the ritual that we did at the beginning. It definitely helps to ground us all. I think when we can find ways to all be in the same breath together, that usually helps to ground the reading a little bit for me. In LA, I did a few open mics, and they were just different. There were different people there. There were different people reading different things, and so yeah, I think when we can all be on the same page and really in the same breath, it feels a lot better in that way.
And could you say your question one more time? If there's different.
Certainly. So she mentioned that the readings in Los Angeles had a different feel than the readings here. And so I was asking, does anyone else have any comments about readings in different locales and if they were different?
Yes. Okay. Totally. I think that just kind of the experience of bringing your artistry into a room of folks who are coming to consume it in a way, it always creates a different dynamic. Even doing different readings that I've done in the Bay Area, it always is kind of like who's in the room and how are our energies mixing with each other, and who has some type of access way through their own personhood into the art. And so I think that's actually one of the things that I love about doing different readings in different spaces is that everyone kind of has a different way of connecting to the work and coming to it. And so I would say that each reading has its really unique kind of flair to it. And I think that I'm from the Midwest, and so I've done certain readings back at home. And even those readings kind of have like a similar kind of energy of we're coming here to listen and witness this art form and this artistry. So I guess that would be my answer. Yeah, they're all kind of different. Yeah.
Hello. Things that are occurring to me as everyone speaks is it's interesting to be in a conversation being led by Black artists and what feels like it's historically been a white space. That has an impact and like an awareness comes around that. I've actually been uninvited to perform in spaces in the Castro because of the tone and of the work that I was sharing, because it made someone or people, I don't know if it's someone or people, extremely uncomfortable. So that's a thing. So when you take risks as an artist, there is a certain amount of fear or compensation that happens when you're vulnerable. You know that you're going to experience. Either you're going to be afraid of it, or you're going to overdo it in some sense to prove that you're not going to be held back by it. You know, so I just wanted to say there's something to be said for like this gentleman made it known when there was something that you wanted to be heard, you wanted to, you know, call out and be like, hey, yeah, yeah. Like the generosity of the audience can really dictate the experience and how much the artist gives back, because what you're doing is letting the artist know that you're present, you're here, you're with them, you're acknowledging and responding to what's being said. And a lot of that happened in the space, which made it much more comfortable and made it a space where I could be more generous as a reader.
Yeah, I was second. I was second that. You know, it's just like as much as we like to think we exist in these kind of like never lands of convergence. You know, where we can all just be our kind of outcasted selves. You know, there's always you're always on someone's territory, regardless of who's meeting. Because you're always in a situation of power, and there's always, you know, the oppressor or the oppressed is getting stronger or weaker at all times within a relationship of contradiction. But I'd add that, you know, there's also kind of, I mean, I can't really tell you like geographically, but like curator to curator, there's differences like, you know, different organizations, different people who take responsibility for culture. They will create really kind of like enjoyable settings. You know, there's some just kind of historical places like the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. It just has almost a character life of its own, just as a building could just be a person. But I think where, you know, usually your best bet is where people are not trying to be, it's not trying to throw kind of like a caricature of mainstream entertainment, you know, and people just kind of settle into what poetry is best used for, which is really just little avatars of the mass imagination. So usually when the poets and the curators or whatever are being truer to, you know, to our nature, that's when you get your hands on more magic. But ultimately, it's the same approach to every, no matter, you know, hey, you drop me off anywhere. You know what I mean?
This is because he performs literally all over the place, like the country, the world, on Zoom, in the car. He's everywhere performing. But I love your question because as a curator, as someone who hosts events, we are founders of Black Freighter Press, and we actually had an event in LA that Briana read at. And I think about how for us, it's like making home wherever you go. And so I was like, I'm coming to San Francisco, be in the Castro, like, let me bring the plants and the water and the things for me that make me feel at home, right? The things that make me feel comfortable being in this space, and then seeing everyone, like, it's just like a breath of fresh air. But I've also been at readings where I'm like, oh, what am I doing? Okay. And then kind of what Tongo just said, it just becomes like a gig. And you're like, all right, let me press play. But there's something that happens when it's like a different spiritual sense where you're able to get vulnerable and get present, and not feel like, oh my gosh, here we go. Like, you know, someone's going to come up and say something to me after that's just out of pocket. But I think that it's different every place. And I don't think that, yeah, it's like a LA versus the Bay type of a thing. I actually think that bookstores and libraries and cultural centers, you know, like those are homes, you know. Sims Library in LA, that's where we did our reading in LA. Here in Oakland, there's Eastside Arts Alliance, you know, the readings there is like, it's another home, right? So thinking about how it's not always the physical space, it's often the people. Yeah.
Always do those rituals
It's something that I've been like kind of like experimenting with. I usually do a lot of like breath. Thank you, sir. I usually do a lot of breath work. I'm also a yoga teacher. And so in just thinking about how we move through life, we're not really breathing. I think what Briana was saying, just us being able to come into the same breath is so important, especially because most of us are not actually breathing like deeply. We're having really shallow breath, which is terrible for our circulation. So yeah, it's something just been playing with, and again, just for me coming into this calendar new year, I've just been sitting a lot with like ancestors and really water. Oh, thanks, sir. Other questions? Oh, Evan's coming.
Want to reflect back to you why that was so nourishing. It was because you were asking us for a moment. You were giving something to us in a moment before you asked us to hold something for you. And there was just something about that was really, really special. Like, I think a lot of us have had a hard time during the pandemic. I've had quite a few loved ones pass during that time. So it was like, it was just really special. And I love that. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely not light. It's something that I think is important because, for me and my family and heritage, it's really important for us to bring our ancestors with us everywhere. It's not just like we're going to leave them where they, in a place. They move with us. So it's important to call them in. Next question. Yes.
So I was blown away at this reading by the the oral performance. And that this is not meant to be shady, but sometimes poets can just be standing there reading words on a page. And it's not, and the reason I say it's not shady is because it's a process of growth, it's not just it is a gift, but it's something you have to nurture. So I guess my question for all of you is could you maybe talk a little bit about how you've nurtured your voice, specifically your performance voice?
Thank you for that big question. Also, make sure you come back April 3rd because Griffin's going to be reading her. But okay, good question. It's something I have also been thinking a lot about. I think in the last year I had a lot of opportunities, thankfully, to be able to get up on the mic and speak and really read my work. And I have noticed a big change. I mean, the biggest change for me was just keeping practicing. I started reading to friends, which really helped as well because that's just so intimate. And then, yeah, I think the more that I'm really starting to believe in what I'm saying, the easier it becomes for me to just kind of stand up there and put all my breath into there. Almost said something explicit, but yes. Yes and yes. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I used to do theater when I was younger, and when you're on stage, you have to find your light. So you have to make sure you're presenting well visually, but you also just have to enunciate and you have to project. And I think those were just things that were kind of beat into me, through my theater times and days. And so whenever I'm performing a short story, I kind of take myself back a little bit to those moments. And I try to put myself a little bit into these characters. And these are characters that I wrote, so I know them. But I always question, how well do I know them? So I'm leaning into their dialogue a little bit more and leaving a little bit room for space and breath. And I think that's one thing that always, as a performer, to be watchful of is to not come up on stage and XYZ a little bit, just kind of go through and that's just for affect, and do it on purpose. But I think that giving yourself that time to breathe in your work and giving yourself that time to really speak as loudly as you can is something that has always just kind of been into it like all the time for me. So coming up on stage and performing just kind of reminds me back of those days a little bit, and I always try to put a little bit of that into my readings.
And you did. Oh, thank you.
I guess I have two main points. Like one is kind of technical, which is that I'll literally like I think cadence is so important. I think rhythm is like the fingerprint of a spoken word artist, like how you get the words out of your mouth and the pace at which you do. I grew up listening to hip hop, and I mean, people may or may not be hip hop like fans, but every specific artist has their sound, their approach, and like a spiritual imprint they put out there vocally. I think Tongo has one of the most distinct styles that if I was to try to use Tongo's cadence, you would say you sound like Tongo or you're imitating Tongo, because it seems to be so like authentic to Tongo. Like it's Tongo being Tongo and sounding like Tongo. So I've always worked for that. I think I came out in the 90s to the spoken word scene. It was very, each time Oshun's eyes, quasar, moondrop falls on my, it was just like, Jesus. And so like, I was like anti that. And so really tried to sound like myself, and would regularly like, I'll catch, when I memorize a poem, I'll catch it in my throat and I'll hum it in my throat, like I won't let it even get to my mouth. And I'll just I like the rhythm of it before, like once I know the words, and it's like how I'll warm up for the piece, and then I get into the nuances of the sounds and the rhythm and the cadence of the piece too when I'm really looking to explore something as a spoken word artist. Like what I do on the page is one thing, but I understand when I'm writing a spoken word piece it's meant to be heard, and part of that is really thinking about the presentation and the way that you speak it.
I would just, but we must extend grace to poets held hostage, holding themselves hostage, and we, because they're just doing what we all do for the rest of the day, which is perform the situation. Right, and somewhere along the line, we decided that, okay, this little way of talking right here is what's going to keep me safe or keep me successful, and on and on and on, right? So it's a natural thing for a cat to approach a microphone with the same kind of defense mechanisms, but emphasis on grace, though, because the whole twist is, regardless of how free I might find myself from the confines of a predetermined persona, I'm always in danger of calcifying, right? So for me, it's just like it's just a one reset after the other. That's all I'm really doing. It's just resetting. Disappearing, and then just kind of reappearing in whatever little combination, whatever little narrator, this little specific line, and what I just so happen to be feeling at the time wants to synthesize,
So it's interesting, Duane, I also did theater, and like before like sharing my own work, I was like, oh, it's so easy to just go and like perform somebody else's thing, right? But like memorizing your work, sharing it with the world, there's a different level of vulnerability that you have to like check in with yourself, Like the piece I shared today like I talked about my grandma. When I first started reading that piece, I would cry reading that, right? And so I wasn't able to get through the whole piece. But for me, it's not that those emotions went away, it's that I carry her with me in a different way. And I love that like each person approaches their work in like such a unique way, because like I kind of want to do like a remix one day where I like read Tongo's work slowly and like just sit with it, and maybe he reads mine like all fast. Because I remember I asked him one day, I was like, when do you breathe? Like, when does that happen? And I appreciate, Duane, what you were saying about like breathing through your work, because that's my approach. I'm just like, all right, like, I'm going to get here. Let me be here. Let me like be with it. And not just trying to like see who I've been like, a fan of or that I've loved and trying to like copy what they're doing. But I'm like, where's my voice? Where, what am I saying and how am I saying it? And I think that's kind of what everyone has said is like, it gets a little like robotic because you're like, well, everybody's doing the button poetry style. I should probably be doing that. And it's no knock to button. They're amazing. I'm such a fan. Like, shout out to Darius, shout out to Rudy Francisco and all the wonderful people. And it's just like a uniqueness, right? And I think that's what's so beautiful about the Bay is that at each reading, you get a treat of so many different readers and so many different styles who come at their work differently. And so I appreciate just how we have had communities that invite us to challenge ourselves, and sometimes he'll call me and just start reading a piece. And I'm like, wait, what? And then he's reading the piece and I thought he's just telling me a story. So what Duane said about like, you can call and check in on people, you can like call and just share your stuff with them. Like it ranges. And I think that's really important to have those springboards. Yeah. Other questions, y'all?
Yeah, I think we got time for one more.
Yes. Okay. Una más.
Yeah, maybe two.
Okay, maybe two.
Let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure what's formulating here for me, but this has all been very helpful. So I guess I have a question for all of you in terms of like, how do you find your vulnerability and what does it actually mean for you in your life, but also like how you bring that to, I guess, your own writing?
Ooh, okay, I'll start us off. You guys can think. I saw their faces go, oh. Like I said earlier, I'm a Pisces. I'm a very like emotional, like vulnerable little fish. And I was always that. I was always very sensitive. I was always, crying at the moon. And it's not out of character, right? And I think that for me, it was like finding power in my vulnerability and not weakness in it, because for a long time I just tried to run and hide. And so instead of, thinking I have to come out here and be loud and yell at you, like that's not the poetry that I make. It's not the writing that I do in any form, right? And when I do, it's for a purpose, right? Like it's like I want you to hear what I'm saying, but sometimes you don't need me to be yelling at you to hear me. So I think that it's not just a matter of like finding your vulnerability, but embracing it. Yeah.
I don't really know, man. I don't know when I ever thought I could ever even be tough. That's when I'm just like, man, vulnerability is pretty much the only thing we got. I don't have a choice, I guess. You know what I mean? I will say though, or what was helpful, and this is like a little bit away from the question, but it might be helpful. I found that the best, I feel like for me, or at least in my view, my craft took a leap and a bound when I started learning that, it's for me. The best way for me to write is actually bored. is actually to write away from paradigms of or dances with euphoria, dances with catharsis. To just poke around reality, poke around my craft with no reward. Because what happens when there's this kind of like this energy seeking or sensation seeking, you tunnel. And you tunnel at where you know energy usually is, either this subject or this style. I know I will get the feeling, whatever feeling you got addicted to. Right? But what tags along when you dissolve that chase is you actually dissolve your quest to enforce a personal territory. And when that dissolves, you actually get your hands on everyone else's territory, because now your mind is roaming a lot more freely about the infinite molecules, both literally and, molecules of story, molecules of, you know what I mean? There's literally, like in this room, there's trillions of things. And so if I approach this room just in a laid back fashion, seeing what is interesting or what connects to what or what contradicts what or what is cooperating, and with no aim to come out of this story of this room as anything other than how I came in, sleepy, then I'm gonna then actually I can get all of the available energy, including everybody in the room or everything. You see what I'm saying? So what what actually, you with me? I'm glad somebody. So, all right, right on. You only need one, So, what's the funny kind of like the revenge for us sensitive people is actually like, actually approaching a moment of art as kind of meekly as possible. The art itself will actually spit you out a monster, you know what I mean? Because you actually you have access to every facet of the universe. So it's almost in a way like you start with, starting with vulnerabilities, how you end up, is really how you end up on top of the dragon, you know what I mean? The catch is that you have to be, willing to hop off of it the second you realize, now I'm trying to use this power for myself, you know what I mean? So
You gotta pass
That was something. Thank you for your questions. Like, all your questions have been really thoughtful. I appreciate that. I think to speak when you've been told that you don't have a voice is like it begins with vulnerability for me. I often speak through shame and speak through anxiety. Like, something will make me uncomfortable, and I'll be moved to write about it because I have to understand why. Or I want to say fuck you for daring to tell me that I can't be this, and then this other voice comes out that wants to resist that. Doesn't mean that the shame isn't there and the anxiety isn't there and the vulnerability isn't there, but I have to perform this to get through this. And if I can get you to withstand this, then it's like I can make a little bit more room for me in the world. And also, like, when I'm at my most vulnerable, what I'm trying to do is make sure that my people can hear me. And I don't necessarily mean black people or queer people or men, or what I mean the person who also was hiding that thing too, to let them know, like, we both have one. Like, it's not what you think. Like, you don't have to be lonely about that, or feel different about that, or think you're the only one about that, or feel separate about that. Like, I have one too. So I'm gonna tell you that I have one, hoping that one of my people will be like, oh shit, he has one. Okay. Like, is kind of a goal of vulnerability for me.
I think I love this question too. I think on a certain level, vulnerability is very universal. I think the more vulnerable you can get in a piece, the wider the audience is. And I think from my own work, growing up Black and gay in a family that was very religious, and in a world that didn't want me to be gay, I came out with a lot of battle scars, mental scars, things that took a long time to process, the things that I'm still processing. And I don't have a fast processing speed. I'm stuck on things. I need to truly kind of to write about it. And it's one of the reasons why I love the fantasy genre, because it's full of imagination. And it's an opportunity for you to deal with reality, but add a little bit of fantasy into it. And in that way, I think that that fantastical aspect becomes some sort of blueprint, a way for you to see yourself out of a certain situation. I performed this story that I performed today twice before. The first time I did it was for a different reading in San Francisco. And I remember it was like a competition kind of thing, which I wasn't privy to beforehand, but I kind of walked into it, and which it was fine. It was fine. Yeah, I don't really believe in competition, and we're all on our own levels. But you know, when I finished the reading, you know, I didn't win the competition. Fine. Right. But someone came up to me after the show and was like, "Oh my gosh, like your story really affected me. I had a really bad relationship with my father, and I was into drugs for a really long time. But when I got out of it, I really used my father's words as a way to kind of build this self of mine." And I was like, okay, I won. You know? Just that connection is the point. So I think it kind of goes back to that vulnerability being universal. Just as Alie was saying before, I'm also a sensitive person, very sensitive boy. And it was something before that I think a lot of my family tried to kick out of me. The world is not going to be nice to you. You are not going to have these rainbow experiences everywhere. You cannot be a rainbow everywhere. And a lot of my work is kind of fighting back at that, because I think you can. And whether you're whether you're in a space that's going to hold it or not is a different question. But I think that bringing your full self and bringing all of myself and my sensitivity and my work to and who I am into my work is really just something I try to do more so. And just accessing that vulnerability has a lot to do with just thinking about times in my own life when I kind of really felt alone, times when I kind of felt like, you know, just in a space that just wasn't able to be there for me like I needed them to be there for me. And it's a pleasure in a lot of ways to write into it and to explore that vulnerability. And I just like what you were saying too about like sometimes like sensitivity and writing that into the work can be kind of like a fuck you in a way where it's like, oh, you thought, you know, that this was going to be the end of me or whatever situation, but no, actually, there's flowers that can grow out of even this land too, and so, yeah.
Yes, so I am a Pisces moon, if that means anything to anyone. So I'm very, very sensitive, and everything about me feels vulnerable all the time. And I think, but I think when I was first really practicing my poetics, like back in high school and undergrad, I was really writing into the surface and kind of like using writing as an escape. And now I have found that I'm really the writing that I'm most proud of is when I'm the most vulnerable and when I say the things that I don't want to say out loud. And I think something that's really powerful for me that I've experienced, especially because normally all the things that I read are just about my mom. Like when people come up to me after and, you know, similar to what you were saying about if they say like, wow, that was really beautiful and profound and all those things, I think that there's something really to be said about going to a space and everyone holding it with you and then letting it go, and for people to come back to you and go back there with you and hold that with you again, I think says so much about why I continue to write vulnerably. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I think that's probably it for time. I want to thank you all so much for being here, and I want to thank all of the authors. You guys, I'm so humbled to be in the room with you all. Thank you, Chebecca and Fabulosa. Thank you, Alie, so much for hosting and setting the energy and the tone.